I'm very pleased to welcome Joseph Phillips as today's presenter. A teacher in Japan for 30 years, Joseph is a professor in the Contemporary Liberal Arts Department of Aoyama Gakuin Women's Junior College in Tokyo, Japan. He's also the coordinator of English language courses for students enrolled in the International Studies major. Joseph is also co-author of the English language course In Focus, published by Cambridge University Press. Joseph, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Eric, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everybody listening in various parts of the world. Thank you for taking the time.
I don't think your audio's on. Sorry.
Okay, once again, my audio wasn't connected. I'm very sorry. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you connected in various parts of the world. Thank you for taking the time to log on and listen to me. I'm going to take approximately 45 minutes for this presentation, and there'll be approximately 15 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm going to move quite quickly, and so I won't deal with questions during the presentation, but I will try to answer as many questions as I can at the end. All right, let's begin. Let's first of all take a look at the title, New Technologies, New Directions for Education. And first I'd like to define the terms. And first of all, what do I mean by education? Well, mainly today I'm going to be focusing on EFL and ESL education and pedagogy, but the principles that I'm talking about today I think have a much wider application and extend to education in general. But the focus today will be on EFL and ESL education. Secondly, what do I mean by technology? Well, as far as technology is concerned, I'm talking about mainly digital technology. And by digital technology, I think there are three essential components. The first is, of course, computers, and fast, powerful, and cheap computers. And by computers, I mean laptops, tablets, and smartphones, as well as desktop computers. Secondly, fast, ubiquitous wireless networks that are available essentially everywhere and at all times. And thirdly, cheap or free cloud data storage that will also be accessible through these wireless networks. The organization of today's presentation, let me talk about that a little bit. I'm going to begin with a historical overview of technology in education. And this will begin with technology that is non-digital, and I'll quickly go through technologies over the last 100 years or so. Next, I'll be talking about computer-assisted language learning, so-called CALL. I'll talk about other technologies, computer technologies mainly, diagnostic technologies, not executive technologies. And finally, I'll talk about these implications. So first, I'd like to ask a question, and I'd like to pose a question to the chat room here, and it's this: is there anything fundamentally different about digital technology that will make its influence on education more profound than that of previous technologies? If you could just respond to that with a quick yes or no, and then we'll revisit this question at the end of the presentation and see if anybody's mind has changed. All right, I can see some yeses coming in. Yes, 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 sure, yes, yes, yes. Okay, we don't have any no's. That's interesting. All right, let's move on. Let's look at some headlines because these underlie, I think, the idea that there's something different going on now with this kind of technology. So I just checked last week I just Googled the question, and I got a couple of headlines I think that are typical. Here's one: Education entering a Gutenberg revolution. And this was from the Irish News last week, and this is no less than the Irish Minister of Education, who said, "We are experiencing a new Gutenberg moment. The world of technology is transforming how we learn." Now, of course, Gutenberg was the inventor or the developer of the movable type printing press, which made books basically available ultimately to everybody, and initiated a revolution in literacy. Here's another headline: Digital divide opening in UK schools, report warns. This is from the BBC, and suggests that 65% of primary schools and 54% of secondary schools complained about a lack of Wi-Fi connectivity. Implicit in this headline, of course, is that schools that don't have this kind of connectivity are operating at some sort of disadvantage. But the reason that I just presented these headlines is I think that there's a sense that something is changing in education through the use of computers and their peripherals. And words like revolutionary, words like transformative are often used. This is not new. And one researcher called Larry Cuban, came out with, about 20 years ago, with a list of, or a sequence of responses to technology in education. And there seem to be 4 stages. The first stage is with any new technology relating to education, there is initial enthusiasm. That is followed by validation by studies. Then the next stage is disappointment due to lack of adoption by teachers. And then the poor teacher is blamed for not utilizing fully the technology. And Larry Cuban illustrates how this set of stages was used in various technologies in the past. Here's an illustration that I found that I think is quite interesting. This was from a set of postcards published in Paris in 1910, and it portrayed the world of the year 2000. And here we can see, I think, the educator's dream. And on the right-hand side, there's a teacher who is placing books into a machine that is cranked by a volunteer student, and knowledge is somehow magically being transported to the brains of the students who are sitting there. And I think this is the initial dream of any educator, that some new technology will come along and work a magic. But the reality is that the classroom hasn't really changed. Here's a classroom from 1897, and here's another one in 2005. And the essential elements of the classroom, if we take a look again, are very, very similar. There's a blackboard, a chalkboard at the front. There are rows and rows of seats where the students sit. There's a desk or a podium for the teacher to stand at the front of the class. But a student from 100 years ago would immediately recognize a modern classroom were he or she to walk into it. So let's go through the history quickly of technology in the classroom. And the first technology that I'd like to look at is the blackboard, that goes back a long way, but started to be incorporated in large numbers in classrooms in the 1830s. It was also followed or contemporaneous with the blackboard were slates that were used by students. And in researching this presentation, I was surprised to discover that the slate continued well into the 20th century. In fact, slates were still being used in schools until basically the end of the First World War in 1918. One of the reasons for that was the cost of paper and the fact that pencil manufacture was not yet fully automated. The magic lantern was a forerunner of the slide projector, I guess. This was something that was used in the 19th century. It was powered by a lamp, an oil lamp or a carbide lamp, that projected an image from a glass slide onto a screen or a wall. Film, beginning in at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, film movies were developed. And here's a quote from Thomas Edison in 2013. Books will soon be obsolete in the public schools. Scholars will be instructed through the eye. It's possible to teach every brand of human knowledge with the motion picture. Our school system will be completely changed inside of 10 years, says Thomas Edison. Well, Thomas Edison in this case wasn't correct. Schools weren't transformed in the way that he expected by 1923. Movies were used in schools, but there were some problems with film. Film was the projectors were expensive, they were bulky, they were prone to breakdown, and they initially did not have sound. It wasn't until World War II, when the U.S. military required the training, and other militaries, of course, required the training of large numbers of people, that films and film strips were incorporated for educational purposes. Post-World War II, these films and film strips were used in schools, and perhaps I should explain exactly what a film strip is. A film strip is essentially a spool of 35 millimeter film that is projected frame by frame onto a screen, and it was often accompanied by a 33 RPM record, and the record contained sound prompts that gave an indication to the operator to move to the next film, in the next slide, I guess, in the film strip. And these became very, very popular. These were used by the U.S. military in World War II, and then became incorporated into education in both by industry and by schools. Back to the U.S. military, I think I read a statistic that more than 400 million showings of educational films were used by the American military between 1943 and 1945. The next technology that I'd like to take a quick look at is radio, which began commercial broadcasting in the 1920s. Almost immediately, in fact, by 1921, universities in Utah, Wisconsin, and Minnesota obtained broadcasting licenses. Radio provided a way for schools and universities to supplement lessons and lectures with additional material. theatrical and musical performances could be used for the first time to augment the textbook. However, there were some limitations with radio, and perhaps the biggest limitation was one that of scheduling. Radio broadcasting occurred at a certain time. There was no way to record broadcasts initially. And so the school or the college had to coordinate their lecture with the time of the broadcast. And in countries such as the United States and Canada with large numbers of time zones, this became problematic. Another problem with radio was that the equipment was expensive. It was bulky. As with film projectors, it was prone to breakdown. It depended upon vacuum tubes. The transistor had not yet been invented. The tubes would often overheat and burn out. And with World War II, there was a great demand by the military for vacuum tubes, and vacuum tube manufacture was diverted for military use. It's interesting, actually, before moving on to television, it's interesting that radio now with digital technology is making somewhat of a comeback in the form of podcasts, which of course are asynchronous. They're not dependent on a particular time of broadcasting. Moving on to television. Television, depending on which country you come from, was invented by different people at different times, but the first university that I could find that had educational broadcasts was the University of Iowa, which was way back in 1933. But it wasn't until post-World War II that television broadcasts, commercial television broadcasts became available. And pretty soon, the educational potential was used. In 1957, the CBS began broadcasting Sunrise Semester, so-called Sunrise Semester because the broadcast began at 6 a.m. These were educational broadcasts mainly in the area of literature, liberal arts, and continued until 1982. In 1967, the United States passed the Public Broadcasting Act, and this led to the creation of the Public Broadcasting Service and National Public Radio. And the Public Broadcast Service was responsible for Sesame Street, I think, which everybody is probably familiar with, and continued for a number of years. I don't think it's presently being broadcast, but there's still a website that contains Sesame Street material. Television suffered the same limitation as radio initially, in that it was a medium that depended on a particular time of broadcast. There was no way to conveniently record and replay television programs until the VCR, the video cassette recorder, came along in the 1970s. Another technology I think that's sometimes overlooked is the overhead projector. This was another technology that emerged out of the Second World War. It had several advantages. It was cheap, relatively cheap, simple to operate. Transparencies could be reused, erased and reused. It was at a convenient height for writing, and the teacher, unlike a blackboard or a chalkboard, the teacher can face the class as the material is being presented. OHPs, overhead projectors, continue to be used. They're rapidly being replaced in many areas, I think now, by overhead cameras, document cameras, which basically have the same function as an overhead projector, but have the added advantage in that they can digitize a 2 or three-dimensional image. Objects can be placed. Any object that is small enough can be displayed by a document camera. That can include notes, books, and even objects. Generally speaking, the visual resolution is also much higher than overhead projectors. Teaching machines are interesting. Teaching machines appeared in the 1960s. They were mechanical. They arose out of the work of behavioral psychologists such as B.F. Skinner, and they incorporated programmed learning. In other words, input from the user, from the student typically, would provide a certain output. And those outputs would consist of questions. Based on the answers to those questions, another output would come from the machine, which would be different depending on the particular answer that was input by the student. So this was something that was adaptive to a particular student's level. They were largely in the 1970s subsumed into programmed learning based on the computer. And so probably by the beginning of the 1970s, teaching machines began to disappear. Phonograph records, going back in time, phonograph records for audio were developed in the late 19th century and used in language classrooms from the 1920s. They had an advantage over radio in as much as that they could be used asynchronously. In other words, they could be taken into a classroom and weren't dependent upon the time of broadcasting. They could also be used, the head of the needle, I guess it used to be called, could be placed at any point on the record, so the operator could instantly return to a particular portion of the record. Tape recorders were developed in the 1930s and in Germany during the Second World War, and audio recording on magnetic tape was commercialized in the United States mainly following the war and became available to consumers in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and immediately began to be extensively used for language instruction. They were taken reel-to-reel. The large reel-to-reel tape recorders were largely replaced by audio cassette recorders, especially since the development of the Sony Walkman in 1979. Compact discs in the 1980s. We've now come to the first digital medium. And compact discs generally began to take over from tape recorders and audio tape in the 1980s. They offered several advantages: better sound quality, the ability to access a particular track rather than having to fast forward, wind, or rewind. Video cassette recorders, non-digital, but video cassette recorders became available in the 1970s and were extensively used in language education. Laserdiscs offered an advantage over video cassette recorders in that, again, a particular track could be located immediately using a laser disc, and also the video quality, the resolution, was improved over video cassette recorders. VCDs and DVDs became the first video digital media. VCDs were popular in Asia, not as popular in North America and Europe. One reason that they were not popular was the fact that there was no digital rights management. There was no way to prevent illegal copying of video CD, and they largely were replaced by DVDs pretty quickly. Okay, moving on to computers, and this will form the main part of our discussion today. And I'm going to talk about computer-assisted language learning, but I'm also going to talk about computers as diagnostic tools. And computer-assisted language learning is mainly concerned with the executive function of computers. In other words, students using computers directly in order to practice language learning skills. Whereas computers as diagnostic tools are using computers to do various things, such as, and let me give you an example. One example is, for example, the monitor theory, Krashen's monitor theory of language acquisition and the effective filter hypothesis. And many of you are familiar with this, of course. The effective filter hypothesis consists of effective variables that affect how learners are able to acquire language. And Krashen places effective variables in three categories. One is motivation. Performers with high motivation generally do better in second language acquisition. Self-confidence. Performers with self-confidence and good self-image tend to do better in second language acquisition. And finally, anxiety. Low anxiety appears to be conducive to second language acquisition, whether measured as a personal or classroom anxiety. Now, computers as diagnostic tools can be used to help to measure actual brain function as it occurs. And let me explain what I mean by that. Functional magnetic resonance imaging is a tool that can be used to show how different parts of the brain are active at different times. So in real time, we can see how different parts of the brain are active. And what functional magnetic resonance imaging shows is that the effective filter hypothesis seems to be borne out by imaging of brains as people are learning. And there seems to be a filter in the limbic system of the brain that prevents higher level language learning, and particularly long-term memory storage seems to be affected by anxiety, lack of motivation, and lack of self-confidence. So we can use computers to, and other machinery, of course, sensing tools to determine how the brain is actually processing information. And this information from these diagnostic tools can be used to support language learning theory. Another way that computers can be used as diagnostic tools is, for example, in corpus linguistics. The first language corpora were obtained by people a century ago, actually going through large numbers of texts and counting words. With computers, we can vastly increase the size of language corpora. And from this research, we can create word lists for learners. And one example is a word list that I was involved in creating called the a new general service list. And many of you are probably familiar with Michael West's general service list that was published in 1953, which is a list of approximately 2,800 words that have high levels of usefulness for language learners. And the general service list has been used by many authors, many educators, to help students to develop their vocabulary. It's a list of high-frequency, useful words. But the list was published in 1953. It was based on research that took place in the 1930s and even earlier. And in many ways, the list has become a little bit long in the tooth, so to speak. It's a little bit dated now. It contains many words that reflect the particular culture of the time. So, for example, there are many nautical terms, words like sailor. There are many terms related to agriculture, words such as cultivator, words such as tractor, hoe, dig, words related to religion, grace, mercy. And so what I and two colleagues did was to use the Cambridge English corpus, a corpus of a multi-billion word corpus, to create a new general service list. And that list is available if you're interested at this link. We developed another one called the New Academic Word List that contains academic words, also from the Cambridge English corpus. So there are two examples of how computers can be used as diagnostic tools. Here's a website also with a link that you can find about the new general service list and how it was created, and there are several papers on the technical details of the list. Let's talk now about computer-assisted language learning, and a researcher called Warshaw talks about 3 stages of computer-assisted language learning. And the first stage is what he calls structural call, that was mainly took place in from the 1970s to the 1980s. This was based on a behaviorist approach to language learning. Materials were largely text-based and largely consisted of stimulus-response drills. The second stage, from the 1980s to the 1990s, he refers to as communicative call, and that focused on interaction, meaning, and the use of language. And the final stage, integrative call, which we're presently in, which began around the millennium, and this marks the beginning of the use of multimedia, in which the computer becomes a facilitator to integrate disparate media. One researcher by the name of Bax disagrees with the timing, and also suggests that we're not yet in the integrative call stage, and that we won't be in the integrative call stage until digital technology becomes what he refers to as ubiquitous, available all the time. Normalized is, I think, the word that Bax uses. And he gives the example of normalized technology as being the pencil, for example. I think the wording here, integration, is very, very important. The power of these technologies is they work together. Integration provides more than the sum of the individual parts. Going back to the 3 basic technologies I think that are required are computers, tablets, smartphones included, of course, fast wireless internet access, and cloud data storage. How has call been implemented? How can it be implemented? Well, let's look at some of the ways that computer-assisted language learning can be implemented. First of all is gamification. This is, I think, a very interesting topic. The video game industry is worth billions of dollars, and game design is dependent upon users buying the games, and often in the case of games on smartphones, iPods, tablets, and so on, in-app purchases are essential to the monetization of it. So game design is based on maintaining interest, maintaining motivation, and there's a lot of interest in how that maintenance of that interest, maintenance of that motivation can be used in educational software. So gamification refers to the use of game elements in design in non-game contexts. Examples might be Khan Academy. Duolingo is a language learning software that uses some elements of gamification. The result is improved motivation, learner autonomy, and feedback. Speech synthesis is another, speech synthesis and speech analysis are other areas of call implementation. Speech synthesis is, for example, text-to-speech software. This is incorporated into some operating systems, also exists as standalone software. So essentially, we can take a text and we can have the computer read the text to us. This can support shadow reading, which has been shown to be effective in language acquisition results. Some critics might argue that text-to-speech software does not provide perfect pronunciation. I think it's getting close, especially when it comes to single word pronunciation, phoneme pronunciation. When it comes to sentences, it's very, very difficult to create natural intonation. But perhaps that doesn't necessarily have to be the goal. There are many non-native teachers who also do not have perfect pronunciation. Speech analysis is the reverse, really, of text-to-speech software. Students can speak to the computer, and the computer can give some sort of evaluation of the student's pronunciation. There are websites that exist in which students can watch short videos and repeat individual words and tell their pronunciation and get a score for their pronunciation. They can then incorporate those words into vocabulary flashcard system. The caveats, of course, as I mentioned, that the pronunciation is not perfect. Flashcards are extremely useful, often incorporating a space repetition, a Leitner system of presentation of the vocabulary words, so that the words move from short-term to long-term memory. A word is presented for revision just before it's forgotten. Here's an example. This is a free website called Quizlet, and here's an example of some vocabulary words from the new general service list that I mentioned earlier. You can look at flashcards. You can also look at have a test, and there are some games, a scatter game and a space race game. Electronic dictionary software can also be used profitably with links to sentences, concordances, audio and video. It offers much more flexibility than a typical paper dictionary. Grammar and spell checkers, although designed for Native speakers can also be used profitably by non-native speakers to improve their English language acquisition. Subtitled video can be used. There are websites that provide video that can be stopped or slowed down, and individual vocabulary words can be isolated and checked. Course management systems are extremely important. A course management system is something that allows teachers and students to interact. Requirements are as follows. They support the placement of course materials online. Students can be associated with different courses, and very importantly, student performance can be tracked. Student submissions can be stored, and communication between students and instructors can be mediated. And this provides a way for teachers and school administrators to manage classes and individual students. Here's an example of a course management system from a hybrid textbook, a textbook that contains a conventional printed material but also online elements. And call implementation through a hybrid text is another way that computers can be used in language courses. Here's one example, the InFocus series that was mentioned in my introduction, that contains a conventional printed text but is also supported with online elements. There's a vocabulary placement test. There is a list of an SRS, a spaced repetition system for learning the vocabulary. There are videos, readings, and audio also. And it also contains, as I showed in a previous slide, a management system for students and teachers. There are online courses. iTunes University is one example. Khan Academy is another. And then there are so-called MOOCs, massive open online courses that are increasingly becoming available. I believe that U.S. universities now have more than 1,000 MOOCs that people can enroll in. The difference between MOOCs and, for example, iTunes University is iTunes U tends to be passive, whereas MOOCs offer the chance for people to interact, and assessment by teachers and teaching assistants is also possible. Language exchange is also implemented by computer-assisted language learning. Students can exchange through voice-over internet protocol software such as Skype, so you can actually do a language exchange with a student in another area. So how are we to use these technologies? And I think the first thing we have to do is, as we would do with any conventional course, and that is we conduct a needs analysis for our students. There must be, learner autonomy must be supported and promoted. Individual goals should be decided as much as possible by the students themselves based on their individual circumstances. I think there's a distinction between facilitative technology and transformative technologies, and I would close by mentioning or listing five, as I see it, five minimum requirements for transformative technologies. I think for a technology to be transformative, it has to first of all, be essentially universally available. It must be, information must be secure. The network that students are logged on must be secure. Student data must be secured. These systems must be affordable. These technologies must be affordable. They must be interactive, and they must be adaptive. And finally, they must support learner autonomy. I'm often asked, what is the best way to learn English by students? And I always answer that the best way to learn English is to move to an English-speaking country. But if you can't do that, then you have to create an English-speaking country where you are. And the technology now to do that is so much more available than it once was. So, returning to our initial question, is there anything fundamentally different about digital technology that will make its influence on education more profound than that of previous technologies? I wonder if anyone has changed their minds. I don't think so, because most of the answers initially were yes. I've made a list of references available that you will be able to download and take a look at your leisure. I'm sorry for proceeding quite quickly. I think my 45 minutes are now up, so I'd like to open up the discussion to some of the questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for a really interesting session. We did have a number of questions and comments as well throughout your webinar, your presentation there. First of all, there was one theme that sort of ran through, I think, and there was a question raised by Kleber Gomes. Do teachers really dream of such technology? That was one of your opening slides, where there was the image of the teacher cranking the books and that being fed into the students' heads. So the question was, do teachers really dream of such technology? And if they did, what would be the teacher's role then? And so that question came very early on. And as you were walking through, as you were talking us through, especially what computers can do, I think that answers that question sort of stuck in my mind. So you, some of the examples that you gave were gamification, flashcards, MOOCs, and so on. So the question to you, what do you think the teacher's role is now with all this technology?
Okay, that's a great question. And going back to that initial slide, of course, I think that I don't think any teachers really believe that that specific technology where we place textbooks into some machine and crank a lever and obtain a result is really possible. But I think the principle that technology will somehow work some magic, and that learning will be facilitated merely by the implementation of technology, is something that we do aspire to. The second part of your question, in what should the role of the teacher be? And I think that's a really interesting question and a really important question. And some people have talked about how the teacher will transform from somebody who is a sage on the stage to somebody who is a guide at the side. And I think that's a really good idea to keep in mind. That the teacher's role, I think, is shifting from being somebody who perhaps is seen at the front of a classroom imparting information to students, rather than somebody who is available to assist students to basically create their own learning environment. And I think much more a teacher is becoming a guide, a facilitator, explaining to learners that this is available, this is something that you might be able to use profitably, and give individual guidance and instruction to individual students based on those students' particular circumstances and those students' particular needs. So I think the role of a teacher is changing.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So perhaps, sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of the echo there. So perhaps part of the role of the teacher, as you say, is to guide the students through more self-autonomous learning.
I think so, yes.
And then we have another question here from Jonathan Turner, and this ties in very nicely with something that you addressed briefly towards the end of your session. In focusing all of these technologies, or perhaps we could focus less on the technologies themselves and a bit more on how connectivity is changing the underlying pedagogy of language learning. You mentioned voice over IP there, for example. do you see under the underlying pedagogy changing now that students or learners are able to interact with each other across the world?
I do indeed. I think that being able to interact, being able to communicate in real time is something that can be an effective way to promote learning and language acquisition. I'm not sure if this answers the question, but a content management system, a management system for students, I think is something that can be really, really useful. And that could incorporate also a language exchange. A management system that makes possible a student access to material at all time, student access to the curriculum at all time. Students can't, typically we meet students once a week, and students are often absent from class because of illness or other reasons, and we often have students saying, well, I didn't know what the homework was, or I was absent last week so I couldn't do it. With a content management system, that's no longer possible. And a student can always access information. A student is always able to know what is required at any particular time. The idea also of language exchange, we have, where I teach, a physical chat room in which foreign students act as chat leaders with Japanese students, in my case, who are learning the language. But we've also extended to that so that we have chat sessions now taking place with a university in New York, so that students can exchange language. Students who are learning Japanese in New York can talk to our students. Our students at the same time can talk to English native speakers in New York. So yeah, without that without digital technology, voice over internet protocol services like Skype or Line, that wouldn't have been possible.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think we just have time for one final question, and I'm going to combine a few that came in there. People have been asking about whether you've ever used Twitter or WhatsApp or Google Drive for teaching. So to summarize those, if you had to choose one app or one piece of software as a service or whatever, at the cost of all the others, which one do you think you might choose?
That's interesting. As a teacher, I think having a content management system, having a learner management system, something like Moodle, is something that, as a teacher, I would choose. As a learner, I think flashcard vocabulary software is extremely useful. I've been living in Japan for 30 years, but my Japanese is by no means fluent, and especially my reading and writing ability in Japanese is not as good as I wish it were. Some of the applications that I found useful are just general reading applications in which I can use the cursor on the screen to point to a word in a Japanese text, and instantly have a dictionary definition and example sentences of that word. Now, that isn't particular software. That is basically using internet sites. There's one application specific to Japanese and English that is called rikai.com, rikai.com, that I use. There is another site, I think, that is called hiragana.com that has example sentences actually read by volunteers, and there are thousands and thousands of sentences there now. So I can take a text or an internet news article, and I can click on individual words, and then I can go to another site and see many example sentences using those vocabulary words. So for me, I think personally, and I think one of the great things about the world today is that we can take control of our language learning. And different learners have very, very different learning styles. What is interesting and effective for one person might be extremely boring for another person. For me, reading is the royal road to language acquisition. That's something that's very personal to me, I think. And so I try to read as much as I can in Japanese. And those sites that I just mentioned have been extremely, extremely useful for me for learning to read. And flashcard software using spaced repetition system has also been extremely useful. But I think your mileage may vary, and depending on your own particular your own particular learning style, your own particular motive. What do you want to achieve? What is your goal? And everybody might be very different. Somebody might want to achieve a particular IELTS or TOEIC or TOEFL score. Somebody else might wish to go traveling. Somebody else might have just a general interest in language. So it's possible today, I think, for individual learners to set their own goals and to use available resources that are essentially free to achieve those goals.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Joseph. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But I'd like to just remind some of you out there that of our next webinars coming up. Next Tuesday, that's October the 14th, we'll be back with Touchstone authors Helen Sandiford and Jean McCartan, who will be discussing conversation strategies. The following week, on the 21st, Craig Thane will explore how teachers' informal, instinctive and ongoing evaluation of learners' progress can feed into a more formal assessment process. If you're looking for fun, hands-on activities to improve young learners' communication skills, you won't want to miss Kids Box authors Caroline Nixon and Michael Tomlinson on October 28th. So we have a very full program beyond that as well. And as always, if you miss any of these webinars, don't forget that we'll share the recordings, including the one of today's webinar, of course, on our YouTube channel and also on our blog. So I hope to see you next week, and thank you again very much to Joseph. Thank you very much to all of you for attending.
Great. It was a great pleasure. Thanks for listening, and hope I get a chance to talk to you again sometime. Thanks and goodbye.